Okay, I think it's time. Can you all hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great, thank you. So welcome to today's React Native workshop. I'll be introducing you to the basics and fundamentals of React Native. Plus, I'll be live coding a course review application, of course, built in React Native. So before we start, what is React Native? React Native is a framework for building native apps for iOS and Android, however, using only JavaScript. It was created by Facebook in 2015, and over the past years, it's gained a lot of popularity worldwide. So, if you know JavaScript, you can use your JavaScript skills to build the real native apps for iOS and Android. What you get is a truly native app, not a web app that looks like a mobile app. So, with React Native, you don't need to learn iOS or Android programming unless you're building a really complex app and you need to talk directly with the native APIs of these platforms. But for the most part, you don't need to do that. You can write pretty much all of your application code in JS and share it across iOS and Android. Hence, a lot of companies nowadays prefer to build their apps with React since they don't need to hire two separate teams of developers as they did previously to maintain two separate code bases, one for iOS written in Swift and the other for Android, either in Java or Kotlin. Another reason a lot of companies love React Native is increased developer productivity and faster time to market. And you see React Native has this amazing feature called hot reload, where the moment you save your changes, you'll see the result on your phone or in the simulator. With native development, however, every time you make a change, you have to wait for the code to compile, which can take anywhere between several seconds and even a minute, depending on the size of your app. Now, a common misconception about React Native is that you cannot use it to build a serious app. Whereas some developers believe that you can only build anything serious by using native languages and tools, that is not true. And there are 5 apps that are actually built with React Native, and I bet most of you use some of them on a daily basis. Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, Skype, and Uber Eats, and many, many more. Now, another point I'd like to add, you might think to yourself, what is better, React Native, Xamarin, or Flutter? Let's talk about Xamarin first. Despite gaining some popularity in 2016 after being acquired by Microsoft, its popularity has been declining since 2017. So, compared to React Native and Flutter, it seems that Xamarin will have far less job opportunities in the future. So now let's compare React Native and Flutter, the two most popular cross-platform mobile app frameworks. First of all, see on the screen on the slide, React Native was created by Facebook, whereas Flutter by Google. In terms of programming languages, React Native uses Java, whereas Flutter uses Dart, a new object-oriented programming language created by Google. Hence, it's still new in the developer community, whereas JS has been around for a very, very long time, as you can imagine, as we have web pages in HTML, CSS, and JS. So it comes with a lot more libraries and pre-written code that you can import and use in your applications and save a lot of time coding like functions that already exist. On the other hand, Flutter, which was released as a stable version only back in 2018, is nonetheless growing its community and looks promising. So if you either React Native or Flutter, you are bound to find enough job opportunities later on. So now that I've introduced React Native, does anyone have any question before we start jumping into code?
Steven, not a question, but I think we all hear your breath while you are talking. Can you take it further?
Oh, was my
come further from your mouth? I don't know. Your breath is
better?
coming to.
We
can hear your breath while you are talking, and it's noisy.
Yeah, I had a problem with my microphone. Is it better now?
Can you keep talking so I can understand?
Is it better now?
Yeah, I think it's better. I'm gonna tell you if it's not.
So was there any problem understanding the content?
Sorry?
Was there any problem listening to what I was saying?
Actually, I understood, but I don't know. If everyone is okay, we can keep on.
No, it was okay. It was okay.
Okay.
We could hear you.
Okay, great. If it ever happens, just interrupt me, it's okay.
Okay.
Okay, so now I'll introduce you to how we build React Native apps. First of all, of course, like when you build any app, you have to set up your development environment. However, since that usually takes a lot of time, I've already done it and I'll skip it for today since we only care about the basics. And I'll just tell you what you have to do. After like installing all the dependencies and prerequisites, whenever you want to create a new React Native project, all you have to do is in your terminal or command line, go to the parent folder where you want to make your app. And all you have to do is write this command, which I'll type in the chat since I type on the screen. Okay. You just do that in the command line and the new project will be built with that name that you specify after React Native. In this case, my project.
Stephen, can you also show it on a screen? Maybe you can type it on VS Code, I don't know, so we can see it on recording too.
Okay, I'll type here. So you do in the command line, npx React Native init. It's actually React Native init, my bad. React Native init. And whatever you want to call your project, for example, my course review project, or any name, it doesn't matter. And a new app name after init will be created. So now I already have a project created over here. It's called Workshop Review App. And these are the folders and files that are automatically created for you when you do that command in the command line. Now, as you can see, there are a lot of files, which for now, since we're dealing with basics, we don't care about. The most important part of your application is this app.js file over here. This is basically your whole application. So you see we import on line 1 React from React. And this allows you to use syntax called JSX. You can see it over here. Now you might think that it's HTML, but it's actually not. But it is quite similar. You have tags, but the tag names are quite different. So instead of your normal div, if any of you have ever done web development in HTML, you have a view, which is basically your container component. And you have text, which represents text elements on the screen. This is our app function. In React, you have a concept of functional components. When you create functions, this is how you function in JavaScript, arrow notation. But you start it with an uppercase letter to denote that this is a component because it will return JSX or something that you will see on the screen. So now, as you can quite make out, this corresponds to this over here. So you have your main container and you have the text in the middle, hello Sue code, which you write in between. Now, in HTML, if you just use div, you could put text between div without using a text component, but you don't have that option in React Native. So every time you want to put text on the screen, you have to use this text element. And you can see the style property over here, which I'll talk about in a bit. And this is the styles object, which also I'll talk about in a bit. And at the end, to export, you just have to write this line, export default, and the name of your function, which is your app, basically. You don't have to care about what it does exactly under. You have to remember that you have to write this at the end of your code. Okay, so you see your function, if it is a component, in the end, it has to return JSX, which is this syntax, as I said previously. View, as I said already, is what represents your container. And now I'll talk about styles. Also in JSX, like in HTML, you can pass properties to components, just as you do in HTML elements. So you have style, which I think is basically, it's a property that is defined for every component naturally. And you notice here these curly braces. Now, this is one special thing about JSX, which makes it, in my opinion, much better than HTML. In HTML, whenever you wanted to pass properties to components, you could only pass string values. So you couldn't pass an int or a Boolean. However, in JSX, you can. And whenever you want to pass a value other than a string, or even when you want to pass a string, or, I mean, basically any JavaScript value, all you have to do in your JSX code is open curly braces, like a placeholder in the place where you want to put the value. As you can see, it's for this prop style. And between it, you can write any JavaScript code. And this is syntax for a JavaScript object styles, which has, and we're passing to it to style its property container, which is defined over here. You see we're importing view, text, and style sheet from React Native. And these are, I mean, available in any React Native project. You'll have to use these, I mean, typically. Now, Stylesheet, it's a React Native API, as opposed to these, which are components. Basically, it's a method. It's an object that comes with methods that you can use in your app. Here you see I use this method create, and you pass to it your styles object. So this is like CSS. This is like an analogy to CSS in HTML, but actually this is not CSS. This is just plain JavaScript code. And these are plain JavaScript properties, although they are, I mean, highly inspired by CSS properties. So let's start off with this property flex. When we say flex, that means that our container, since this property, we're using it here for our main container, that means that it's flexible. So it will stretch horizontally and vertically in the screen to take any available space. And since we're passing to it 1, that only means that it will take the whole screen. So this view, it's basically all this screen. We pass with background color, and this is white. As you can see, it's white. Align items center and jobs and justify content center are just used to center in the middle of the screen any components that you pass as children to the view component. Text, as you can see, you just pass between it the text that you want to print to the screen, and it can take properties as well, like style, as I mentioned. We could say styles.text, and we could create a new property for that text over here. For example, if we wanted to color it blue, we could just, as I mentioned before in the intro, I talked about something called hot reload, where whenever you save your changes, you'll instantaneously see that on the screen. So if you do that right now, if I press save, just wait a bit, you see it's already blue. Maybe that's not clear since it's a bit blurry, so it's better if I change the background color. If I make it black instead, you can see it instantaneously changes. So now let's move on to more like concepts that you'll actually use in a real life app, because no one's going to use just a view and the text in his application. So one concept that is, I mean, used across all platforms is a button. And that comes too with React Native. So instead of this text, let's say we have a button. And as you can notice, I don't have to write it up here in React Native and import it, because IntelliSense in VS Code does that for me. It gives me suggestions, and as you can see on the first line button, auto import from React Native. And as you can see, it's automatically imported for me. This is a self-closing component. You don't pass anything between it. So I just close it like this. Now let's give it text. Buttons come with a property called title, where you pass to it the title that you want to be in the button. In this case, let's say my button. And as you can see, it shows on the screen. And this is like a nice time to mention why React Native is actually good. As I mentioned, that this is like not native, but what actually happens is that these are like concepts that you use in React Native, but when you run the app either on Android or on iOS, their equivalent in that native code are used in the application. So this button over here is like translated to what you would use to display a button in Android. So this is like your default Android button. If I ran an iOS emulator, which I currently don't have, you'd see like the native iOS button. So buttons aren't just to display text, they're to do something when you press them. So we have this property called Onpress, where I want to pass to it a function to do something, to execute something when I press it. So And since I want to use a function as a property, which I can't in HTML, I'd have to write the string. I can open curly braces to start writing JS code, and I could pass a one-liner function like this and using arrow notation. And let's say for now console.log button clicked. So now refresh. If I press it once, if I now open terminal, then one sec. Yeah, there it is. Log button clicked. I clicked it 2 times, so I have it 2 times. Now, usually your functions won't be that simple where you're just doing one-line code. They'd be like multiple lines of code. So what you could also do is instead of defining the function inside of the prop, you could create it beforehand inside your app component. Let's say const myfunc equals same thing for now, console.log I was clicked. And now I'll just replace this over here with that variable name, which is essentially the same thing, myfunc. So now if I press this and I open the terminal, I was clicked. And so now these are like the basic core components that you're going to use in every React Native project. And there's actually documentation online that shows you all the possible properties that you can use in these components that you might be interested in to know what limitations you have or what possibilities you have. And since we're like short on time today, I'm not going to show that documentation, but I'm going to write it in the chat if you're interested in visiting it later on. And here's the name of the website, reactnative.dev. Okay, so let me move over. So we covered view, we covered text, we covered button, and style sheet. All right, there's one important thing, because I told you that we're passing to style, basically a JavaScript object. So you might ask yourself, what's the point of using stylesheet.create? Why not just do this? I mean, just define a JavaScript object, because I still get the same result. Well, one nice thing about stylesheet.create is that it gives you validation. So you might accidentally here write a wrong name for a property. For example, instead of background color, I might write this. So you might not realize it. As happened in my case, my code resulted in an error. And if you didn't have the stylesheet.create, you wouldn't know where that error came from. Or it would take you like a much longer time to realize that you called the prop stylesheet.create, which is this API that you import from React Native. It tells you background color is not a valid style property. So you immediately solve your problem. And you just come here and change it. And also, as you might have noticed, it gives you suggestions for styles, as in this case, align items. So I just press enter and it writes it out for me. So now let's move on to one more essential component, which you basically see everywhere, and or the alert in this case. So for this, we use the API called alert, which you import from React Native. Let's say now on button click, I don't want to cancel something, but instead I want to show it on the screen like in a pop-up that you can press OK to cancel. So let me get rid of this function. And over here, on click, what you do is you write alert dot, have this method you can see, alert, and you pass to it what you want to show in the pop-up. I am a pop-up. You press OK. Now when I press it, you get this pop-up. I am a pop-up. OK. And that's it. And you notice that this is the native pop-up style for Android. On iOS, the same thing. You'd see the native style for iOS, which I think comes with rounded corners. So these are like basically the core components that you're going to use when designing your user interface. Of course, they come with much more props, but we don't need to go over them today since we're going to the basics. Let me move over to one essential concept in React functional components or in React components. let me try something before I say that. Let's say we have a button and the text on our screen. So let me create a text under it, text. And let's say we show in this text, as you can see, this is like a cool thing. You can do this. I can create like dynamic text. So if I pass with the name of a variable that I'm going to create after this, let's say counter, I create it here. Let counter equals 0. So it shows, and let me make it a bit bigger. This is a nice time to add style too, so that you get used to it. Styles. Oh, already made the text. Okay, good. It's a bit bigger. Color blue. Font size. You see it auto completes it for me. About 20. Wait, maybe a bit bigger. 40. Okay, that's good. So now let's say when you press this button, I don't show the alert anymore. I want to increment that variable by 1. So what you'd expect to happen is that since I increased the value of this variable by 1, this here automatically is going to show 1, since it's showing the value of this variable. So let's try that out. So now on press, let's say I'll do counter equals counter plus 1. So now let's try it out. As you can see, nothing happens. So you might think that there's like something wrong with the code. Well, let's try to debug it. Let's console.log the counter, and every time you press it. So let's create a function here. Const myfunc equals error notation again. Counter plus 1 console.log counter. Basically logging its value to the console. So now let's do that over here. Let's pass that function to our onPress property of the button. So now let's press it the first time. My button, nothing happens. Let's see the terminal. What did it print out? It printed out 1. Let's try again. Press, you see it's 2, 3, 4. So why isn't anything changing on the screen? That's because in React Native, you have this concept of state. Every component, which in this case, for example, app, has a state object, which defines like a set of variables that define its state. And whenever any of these variables change, the component has to change as well. The UI has to re-render, to refresh. So if you change the value of a variable internally of any variable, the UI isn't going to refresh. So you're going to see the same page that loaded at the beginning of the app. So if you want to use each component state object, you have to create your variables this way, your state variables. So you do const, you open brackets, and first you pass the name of the variable that you want to create, in this case counter, and you pass the name of the function that will change the value of your state variable, of your state object property, every time you want to change its value. In this case, let's say set counter. And what you do is you set equal to use state. And if you can see here, it says auto import from React. And you pass to it the initial variable, the initial value of counter. In this case, 0. So what this does is it creates for you a state variable that's for the component app, and it sets it initially to 0. So now if we want to change its value over here, we shouldn't do counter plus equals 1. What we should do, if we want to change its value in the state and we want the app to refresh with the new values, what we do is we set counter the new value, which in this case is going to be counter plus 1. And let's try that out now. If you see, it works now because we're changing the state of the component app, and thus app is returning this again. And when it returns this again, the value of counter over here is now 1, and then 2 and 3. So you see the result on the screen. So now let's start implementing our course review app. What we'd like to see, first of all, is maybe like a list of all the courses that you're taking. Let's say you're a freshman, so you only have the 6 or 7 courses that you take in freshman. So let's create a constant array for that. Let's get rid of all this. We're going to start from scratch. Okay, so const courses equals, what do we have? A math 101, let's say, an S 101. Then you get rid of this too for now. Let me get rid of the styles. Okay. So the basic React Native project. And you have to import this all the time to use JSX syntax, which is that HTML similar syntax. So let's define the array math 101 and S 101, SPS 101, let's say, hist 191, TLL 101, and TIP 101. Since this is going to be constant, I mean, like you could define it in app, but that's not necessary because, I mean, it's not going to change. So you can define it outside your component and just use its value inside your component when you run it. Okay, so to get rid of this here, let's just return view for now. View style equals, and you can, I mean, instead of passing a variable like before, you can, I mean, create the style object inline, like as we did for the function for Onpress. So style flex to make it fill the whole screen, flex 1. And let's make it self-closing for now. Okay, so we don't have anything. We just have a container. Oh yeah, I didn't import it. You always have to import when you want to use it. Okay, so that's it now. So now you want to show, like, let's say buttons or like segments on your screen for each course. And when you press it, let's say you want it to take you to a new page where you can add the review to that course and see other people's reviews maybe. So we want to wait to like show for each element in this array a specific similar component, because each element here is going to have the same component. So what you can do in that case is make use of one more component, which I haven't mentioned already, and it's called flat list, and it's also one of React Native's core components. So what this does over here, let me start writing it out. Okay, flat list. It has 3 major props or properties. One is data. So this component, this flat list, what data is it going to like map to the screen? So you just pass with the array that you want to show, like to map to the screen, in this case courses. Secondly, there's this prop over here, key extractor. Now this isn't like that essential, but it is for React. What it does basically, since you're going to have like similar components for each course, you need to have like a unique key for each component, so that React, whenever like one of those components changes on the screen, React can know which one changed by looking at the key. It's something along those lines. We don't need to delve deeper into that for now, since we're dealing with basics. So what you pass to it in a function, and key extractor takes by default, as you can see in this over here, item and index. Now index is optional, but we can use it over here for our key. When this is run, when key extractor is run, this is called for every element. Item represents the element itself, and index represents its index in the array. So like a cool way, or I mean a good way to create a key for every element. Since that index is going to be unique, we can just return that index and convert it to a string like that. And the most important prop is the render item. And this is what's going to print that common or show that common component for every element in the array on the screen. It takes item, which is each element, and you can do something with that. So you want for each element in your array, in this function, you want to return JSX. So for this gets called for each element be shown on the screen, one over the other, so vertically. So in this case, we want to show it. Let's say for now they're not buttons. Let's say they're divs for now. So just like a list that aren't clickable. So let's just use view for now. View. Let's give it some styling that we'll create shortly. Styles dot nope. Styles dot okay. Course. Let's say course. And we want to show like optimally the text. So we have to make use of the text again. We auto import from React Native. We pass to it style, let's say, to make the app look nice at least. Styles dot course text. Okay, and we pass in between the element. So you open curly braces again, since you want to pass in JavaScript, since variable is JavaScript, it's not a string. Item. So you do it that way. So now it gives an error because can't find variable styles, so we didn't do that yet. So let's do that like before over here under this. So const styles equals. Let's create a styles object for this as well. Just so that we can like make the code a bit cleaner and not put styles with JSX all over the place. So styles dot, you can say container. So let's start defining these properties. So first of all, we have container, which is the main container of the whole app. And as you can see on the screen, the courses are already showing, but they're showing without any style, without like any div around them, without any border. That's because they have no style. So they're showing exactly that. They're showing you a view, and they're showing you text, which is basically what you see. So of course, our app isn't going to look like that. I mean, that wouldn't be user-friendly, or it wouldn't look nice. So let's create some styles for that. So first of all, for the whole container, and we're going to give it flex1. Right, I forgot. Let's make use of Stylesheet.create so that we can have auto suggestions, or yeah, autocomplete. So now it must show flex, yep, 1, so that it can fill the whole screen. We want the background color, let's say, to be like blue, but a bit transparent, so you can make use of this, which you use elsewhere too, RGBA. You pass to it four values, one for red, one for green, one for blue. We don't care a lot about it now, but basically red is going to be 0, green 0, and blue 255, which is basically the maximum blue you can get. And the opacity, which is this alpha over here, this defines like the opacity of the colors. So 1 would be the max, so you'd have the full color, and 0 would be completely transparent, so you don't see the color. So we want to make it like a bit transparent. So let's say like 0.7. We want to align our list horizontally. So for that, to center something horizontally inside a parent container, to center its children horizontally, what you do is you use this property align items, and you can pass to its center. So now its children, which in this case is going to be our flat list, and its components that are automatically or dynamically created for each element in the array, are going to be horizontally centered in our main container, in our main view. So that must be enough for it, for our main container. Now let's create some styling for each view, for each course. So for that, we called it course. let's say its width is going to be about, now you can use values, not only numeric like I did before, like 20 or 40, you can use string values and say something like 80%. What this means is that wherever this view is, wherever it has that style with 80%, its width is going to be 80% of its parent component, which in this case is the view. And since the view's width is the width of the screen, each course will have a width that is 80% of the screen. So its height is going to wrap each text, so there's no need to give it any height. It will just, take height as much as the text. Now, let's give it some background color. Maybe blue, dark blue. You can also use names, as I'm sure you're familiar with. Let's give it some border radius, maybe, to make it make the view look round. So you do that like that, border radius like 5, let's say. Let's see if something happens. Yep. Okay, we didn't finish the styles yet. Border radius 5. And let's move on to the text. What did we call it? Course text, I believe. Yep. I'll get rid of this. Course text. Let's say we want our text to be white. Or we can use hashtag FF as before. And let's give it a font size of about 20. And that must be it. Now there's a problem with the width. One sec. Nope. Nope. One sec. Okay, just a sec, sorry. Okay, well, if we want to get rid of that, we can instead make use of another React Native core API, which is dimensions. And this will give you the dimensions of the screen. So those dimensions include width and height. So we can create const width over here. Const, if you want to get the width of the screen using dimensions, using the dimensions object, you do it this way. So dimensions dot get, you have here screen window, we'll use window and width. If I take that now and I pass it over here, we want it to be 80% of it. So width times 0.8. Okay, so that looks better now. But still, since we didn't give any margin or anything, it still looks a bit ugly. So let's change the style a bit. So first of all, let's set between each component, between each course, some bottom margin, some margin vertically. So we could give a bottom margin to each component over here, each container, each view. Margin bottom, let's say about 20. Okay, the text isn't centered. We could do so here. Since text is wrapped in this view, we're going to center this view's elements. Just as we centered this view's elements, the line item center, we're going to do the same thing for each course view. So if you pass that here, okay, that looks better. We could give maybe a padding to this as well, padding vertical, so that it doesn't look stuffed. Let's say about 20. Okay, and finally, let's not make it start from the screen. One way to do this is to give some padding top to your main view. in this style object using padding top. Let's say about 22. Okay, so this looks nice now. But the bad thing is these don't do anything. They just display to you what the courses are. So if I click, you see nothing happens. So before jumping into navigation, which is a whole other concept that I have to start from fresh, let me tell you one thing. Let me mention one more component that you can use in React Native. If you want to make a container like Vue, if you want to make this clickable so that when you press it, something happens, you can do that in Vue. So it doesn't have an on press. You see, there's no suggestion for it. So if you want to do a view, or if you want to render a view that's clickable, React Native also has this core component, which is called Touchable Opacity. So let me just fix this a bit. Let me add one more course here. I forgot if. Okay, so you see I didn't have to change anything in the JSX because what this does basically, it takes this data courses. So I just changed the value of courses. I added one more element, which is if. And the same thing for this element, this function will get called, which takes in that item, which in this case is just the string if100, and it returns this JSX syntax over here, which is just a view, this basically, this part, and some text inside with some styles that we defined over here, and the text shows the item, and we use curly braces because this is a JavaScript value. We can't say this because this would be, if this happens, look what happens. You see it takes it as a string, as an HTML. So if you want to render the value of some JavaScript variable, we have to pass the curly braces. We have to put the curly braces to say that what's between is JavaScript, not a string. Okay, so now let's use this touchable opacity. So off the bat, I mean, what you could do is you could replace every view, or not every view, at least every view that you want to make touchable with touchable opacity, because a touchable opacity is basically a view, but it comes with the ability to do something on press. So if I just do that, you see nothing changes because it's still a view. It takes the same styles and everything. But if you see, I get this suggestion now, on press. So I can do something now on press. So let's say for now, just to make sure that it's unique to every element, on press, I'll just alert, let's say for now to the user, alert.alert, as I taught you before, you clicked this course item, because we're still returning this inside of this function, and this function takes that item variable as an argument. Okay, so let's test it. If I press this now, you see it's now clickable, which it wasn't a few seconds ago with the view, and it tells me you clicked Math 101. Let me add some space. Okay, so you see, it's different for every element. So that means that's working. And as you can see here, when I press it, like the opacity changes a bit, which like some people might not like. So you could pass in this prop, which is available for touchable opacity, and it's active opacity. What you pass to this is a number between 0 and 1, which is basically the opacity of the color of the touchable opacity, this view over here. You pass to it the opacity that will be like given to this view when press is active. So if we want the opacity not to change, to be full all the time, so on active, on press active, we just want the opacity to be 1. So if I save again, you see it doesn't like blur out like before. So this looks nicer. So we have now like our main page ready. So now we're going to jump into navigation. So before I do that, since it's like a new topic, does anyone have any questions? Okay, so now let me introduce you to navigation. So let me call this something else for now. Let me call it rename, or over here, rename to, let's say, main.
Something.
And create app.js again. And import React from React like before. Okay. And export the default as always. Okay, so that's it. So now, when we created the app, we just had that page. You notice that it only had one page. Like you could show a pop-up and all that, but you couldn't like navigate to a new page. And React Native actually doesn't have a built-in navigation API. So for that reason, there's an API called React Navigation, which you have to install before you can start using navigation and like navigate between different pages as you could automatically in HTML, for example. So I've already installed it previously, since it takes time and I don't want to take time away from the workshop. So what you do is you import this over here, navigation container from @React Navigation Native. This over here. It showed automatically because it's installed. Now there'll be an error because the app over here doesn't return any JSX. So there's an error in the code. And there are different types of navigation in React. You have, for example, or in React Native, you have, for example, stack navigation, which basically means that you have pages where when you move to a new page from one page, that page gets added like a stack over your previous page. So like a stack of trays. So imagine you have like one tray, which is your screen, your page, and you add a new tray over it, a new page, and it will be like a stack over it. And if you go back to the previous page, that gets removed from the stack, and you go back to the first page, and you can add many pages like a stack over each other. That's one type of navigation. Another type is you have tab navigation, which like Instagram, you can move between tabs, which we won't use today. We're going to use stack navigation, obviously, since we're going to move from one page to another, like on a button click. So a new page gets added over it. And you have also drawer navigation, where if you slide like to the right, you can see a drawer with different, how can you choose different opacity animations? What exactly do you mean, scissor, by different opacity animations? Okay, I'll answer the question in a bit. So I told you about stack navigation. You have tab navigation. I said the two, which, as I said, you can slide your finger and you get a drawer with like different titles. You click one of them, it takes you to a new page. So like a drawer, basically. So for today, we're going to use stack navigation. And for that, you have to import this function over here, create state stack navigator from @React native stack, React navigation stack. So now if you want to create like a navigation system for our app, first of all, you have to add to index.js over here. You don't need to care why you do this. You just have to remember it. This line at the beginning. So you shouldn't include anything before it. This is nothing. I could leave this. So you have to add native, import React Native gesture handler. That's it. Secondly, in your app, in your main application, your main component, it's going to be this component. Return navigation container, which is basically what I just imported from React Navigation Native. So if you want to use navigation in your app, that has to be your main component, your parent component. Okay, secondly, we said we wanted to do, we want to make use of stack navigation. So for that, you create a stack object before your application, before your functional component, and you call create stack navigator, which returns an object with two properties, navigator and screen. So how you use that is that between navigation container, you say stack. You don't have to like understand why it's like this. I mean, even I don't understand most of it. You just have to remember it because you just care about the functionality in the end. So you have stack.navigator. So that's the main thing for your stack navigation. And now you pass to it as stack.screen, which is the other property I told you, all the screens or all the pages that are going to be part of your navigation system. So it always takes at least two properties, and they are name. Let's say the first page, which is going to be the main page that we see, which contains all that list. Let's say we're going to call it main. And the other property is component. And you pass to it the function or the functional component that you want to render in that page. So in this case, let's say main as well. We'll create it shortly. That variable currently doesn't exist. And it's a self-closing tab. So for now, we only have one page. We want to make use of this main component, which is over here, which we created over here, that whole flat list, that page. So let's call this main instead of app. Main over here. So what you can do now, if you do export default main, is that in another file, you can import that variable or that function from that file path. So I want to import main from, you open quotations, you do / to see the current folder, and main, which is that file. And now it will show. One sec. See. Let me just reload the app. Okay, there we go. So you see, although our app isn't that page, our app is a navigation container which has a stack navigation system. And the only screen actually is this screen, whose component is main. So this is what we see initially. So you could pass to stack navigator many properties, which you can also see on React Navigation's documentation. One of them is initial route name. Now, since we only have one route or one screen, one page, it doesn't really matter since that's the only page. But let's just do that, I mean, to be consistent. So it's called main. Since we gave it name equals main, and nothing will change. Okay, so now let's create like since when you press on each button over here or each touchable opacity, like you're going to see the same page, but what happens is that page will have like reviews for a different course, but the structure or the UI will basically be the same. So one might think to create one page for every single item, but what if you have like 50 items? Of course, you're not going to create 50 pages. You're just going to create one since it's all the same, and you can pass to it in different properties. Okay, just like there are different animations. You move from one page to another, the different transfers for the opacity that happens. button. Well, different transition styles. Well, that's another topic, which, I mean, a simple Google search will get you the answer. But I mean, we don't really care about it now. On iOS, since it's native, it will show you by default the sliding animation. But on Android, we'll see like the onto animation, which you'll see in a bit. So now, as I mentioned, we want to create a new component, basically a new page for our navigation system, which is going to be the review page that we see every time we press the button over here. So let me create a new screen, stack.screen, name equals, let's say, review, component equals, let's call it review as well. Let's say we import it. Well, it doesn't really exist, but now we created. Import review from /review. And then we'll create the file in a bit. So it's going to give an error now since it doesn't exist. Let's create a new file, review.js. As usual, you do import React from React. You call it review equals. For now, let's just return a simple view before we start doing the review capability. Let's return view style equals styles dot nope dot container and some text. Which for now is just going to be course, let's say. Export default as usual. The name of the component, review. And since you might think that the file name has to be the same as the component that you're like exporting from this file, that's not true. I'm just doing that for consistency. So you can call the file one thing and the component that you return another thing. Okay, so now we have this. Wait, there's the styles too. So const styles. And also you see that I'm creating a styles object in every file. Now, some people, they like to create one separate file for all your styles and they export or they import the styles from there. But I mean, you can do it this way too. So it's just a matter of preference. So we called it container. As usual, we have to give it so that it takes the whole screen. You want to give it a background color. This time, let's say just plain white. We can say white or hashtag FFF like before. Align items, center. So we center things horizontally, and justify content center. So we center things vertically. So comma, okay. So now we have this component, but we don't see it anywhere yet. Why isn't this refreshing though? Wait 1 sec. I think the emulator may be disconnected after that error. So I might have to reload it. Let me make sure. Oh, no, wait. Okay. If I do .save. Okay, good. So we have that file now, review page created, that component. And we are importing it over here in app.js. And we are using it here. But still we can't access it because we didn't create like a functionality to move to that page from this current page, which is main. So let's do that right now. So let's move over to main.js. Since we're passing this component main, which is basically a function, this is function syntax. So although it's like a component, it returns JSX. In essence, it's a function, and functions can take arguments. So when you pass main to this property over here of stack.screen, automatically it gets passed an argument called navigation. So I can let this main functional component take an argument called navigation. And you see I open curly braces. That's because these functions, which are used as components, get passed an object argument, which is basically an object called props with keys that refer to the attributes or the props that you can use, like data, key extractor, and item. So for example, whoever wrote the code for a flat list would have wrote it like this. So const flat list equals data. So it takes a data property, it takes a key extractor property, and so on. So we know that this takes a property called navigation. And what this is an object, navigation. It lets you make use of the navigation system. Like, for example, you could navigate, essentially, the most important functionality is to move from one page to another. So if you want to move from one page in a navigation system to another page in that navigation system, you can call a method on the navigation object in one of the inside the component. Let's say when you press the button over here, instead of doing alert, let's move to a new page. So what you do is navigation dot navigate to, and you pass to it the string, which is going to be the name of the page that you want to see. So here the name is review. So we're going to call that review. So now if we press this, we're not going to see, an alert anymore. We're now going to move to a new page. Wait, is it navigate to? I'm not sure. Oh no, wait, sorry, it's actually navigate, not navigate to. Okay, so let's try that again. Okay, so you see, we now move to a new page in our navigation system, which is basically this component over here, which has a view and the text in the middle, course, that. And you see you get with that navigation system, like a header, its title is basically the name of each screen. And since it's a stack, so it's like a tray over something, you can remove that stack. And to remove that stack, it's like going back. So you get this back button to remove this stack from the current stack of trays, let's say, and whatever tray was under it, which in this case was main, will be shown. So you'll move back to it. Just like that. And I can move from any component to the same page, since that function, it's for every touchable opacity, which gets rendered for every element in our courses. So for now, it's the same page. You get the same page when you press every button. So not only with navigation do you get navigation.navigate, you can not only pass the name of the component that you want to go to, but you can also pass as an additional argument a params object, which is basically like some values that you will pass to the new screen. So that new screen can use those values to show like something related to those values on the screen. So in this case, we only care about the name of the course. So we'll create an object with property course, and its value is going to be item. Since we're calling this again in this function over here, so that item comes from this, which is essentially each element. So now if you want to make use of that params over in our review component, review page, since it's in the navigation system, of course, it has this over here. But not only does it take navigation, it also takes something called route, a route object. And if you want to get the values of the keys that get passed to this page whenever you navigate to it from one page in the stack, and you pass with it using this syntax. So you say const, you open curly braces, and you write the name of the key that you defined over here. In this case, it's course. So you basically say course equals route dot params. So what you do here is essentially you're creating you now have a variable called course, which is equal to the value of the course key in this params object that gets passed to the page when you navigate to it. So now we have this course value over here. So now instead of showing course, let's show its value. So we open curly braces again, since it's JavaScript, it's a variable. And now if we move to one page, you see now we see the course. Actually, we don't see just one single page, one static page for every, but we now see the course. So math 101, TLL 101. Okay, so now we can move on. We can now make a reviews like page. So this page would have essentially a list of all people's reviews, and it would have the option for you to add your own review. So you might think that it would have like an input, like a text input somewhere where you could put text and then do something with that text, like on the button click. And also, after putting that review, you'd see it with the other reviews. So if you followed the workshop today, you might think immediately, I want to show a list of reviews. So like, what component can I use to show those reviews? A flat list, essentially. Text input, we still didn't see that. We're going to see that in a bit. We have like about 15 minutes left. I'm not going to live code this part now. I actually have it already here. I'm going to copy it, and I'll go over it and explain each part, not waste time. Okay, we called it review. Let's paste this above the export, because after you export, you can't do anything. You're exporting it. Okay. Exporting review for default review, and our component over here is going to be called review. Okay, so as we did before, it takes route navigation, and we're getting that course route.params. But now you have all this that's completely new to you. One sec. Okay, so this is basically what I've created. So this is like what our review app would look like. Currently, there are no reviews. If I add a review like this, I'd say this course is nice. Add review. You see it gets added like to a list. I can add one more review. This course is bad. See, I'll review again, and it gets added to the list. You go out, you come back. Where is it? NS. You still have those reviews. So now let's explain how all that happens. We have about 100 lines of code, so I'll go over it. Shouldn't take too long. So we now have all this logic that we're doing before we're returning the actual JSX that we're rendering to the screen. So this is basically what we're showing on the screen. We have this view, our main container, which takes a styles course container, which I've defined in this styles file over here. Now, in this case, I put all the styles on one page. So what was it? course container. There it is, course container. We gave the flex 1 to take the whole screen, align items center, to center things horizontally, some padding from the top over here 20, and the background color of hashtag FFF. So there's this syntax which is still the same, although it might look strange. I told you every time you want to make use of JavaScript, you have to open inside of JSX, you have to open curly braces. So you can also do that to show different components depending on different conditions. So like, for example, if some condition is true, you want to show a text. If that condition is false, you want to show a button instead in its place. So to make like the dynamic. So I don't know if all of you are familiar with the syntax question mark and column, but this is basically an if else, a one-liner. So you pass a condition. So this is a view. And between that view as a child, I've opened curly braces because a child component, but dynamically. So based on some condition. So first of all, we check reviews. Is it equal to null? We use here 3 equals instead of 2. That's how JavaScript works. So we're checking, is the reviews equals null? And because initially, when we create our app, when it runs on someone's phone, there are no reviews. And so we create a state object initially when we show the component, in this case, reviews. This is the same syntax that I showed you a couple of minutes ago for creating state values. This is the function that we use to change the value of the state value set reviews. Use state so that it will be part of the state and its initial value is null. Because initially you don't know, because initially there are no reviews. So you check, is it null? If true, which initially it is, you return this value over here, which is JSX, and you return this component called activity indicator. So activity indicator, it's another core component of React Native. You see, I imported from React Native. And what it shows basically is a loading sign. And here, since things happen quite fast, you might not see that loading sign all the time, but we just put that there for like user friendliness. So if the user has to wait for us to get the reviews, he shouldn't like just see a blank screen. Because if he sees a blank screen, then you might think that there's something wrong with the app. So we must like give him that sense that he's waiting for something, that we're doing something in the background. So initially, if reviews is null, there's nothing. If there are no reviews, we're showing to the screen as a child to view an activity indicator. Else, if we have some reviews, so reviews is an array with some reviews, like in this case, strings, since we don't care about who gave those reviews, since in this case, it's just an app for you to use. So it's not like connected to the Wi-Fi or to some wireless online database where you can see anyone's reviews, which is something we'll show hopefully in a later workshop. You'll just have your own reviews. So on your phone, they'll be stored in your local storage. Reviews, you create reviews, you can see them later on, but other people can't see your reviews if someone installs the same application on their phone, and you can't see other people's reviews as well. So if you have reviews, so when this condition is false, reviews is not equal to null anymore, this is the else. So you return this instead, this value over here. So first of all, and when you return something that's JSX, you can't return like multiple components over each other. You have to return one component, and that component can take in. So if anytime you want to return multiple components, like it's like the norm to create a container for all those components. Otherwise, you can't. It'll give you an error if you remove this view over here. Although this view essentially is just to contain those components, so it doesn't really matter. So we return, first of all, that parent view, that parent container, which takes as a style prop styles.reviews container. and styles actually we import it over here, import styles from /styles, which we created over here in the separate file. You see const styles, and we export it over here, export default styles. So what was it? One sec. .reviews container. So it's nothing, it's just because we don't really care about styling. It's just to contain our elements. So we just give it a width of 0.8 times width, which is the same variable that I used using dimensions, that dimensions API, which gives you the values, like the dimensions of the screen or window. The difference is screen, it's basically the width and height of your whole screen, and window, it's the application's windows, so the window of the application. So you would want to get the width of the window, usually not the screen. And back to review.js. So now again, we're doing the same thing, like internally. So like, what do they call it? Internal, I mean. So again, I want to show something based on if something is true or not. So for that case, you have to create a variable. In this case, it's is reviewing, because you notice that if you're reviewing, you get a different thing on the screen. You get a text input, but if you're not reviewing, you just get a button which tells you add a review. So there must be some way to keep track of whether the user is currently reviewing or is not reviewing. So in this case, is reviewing, which is another state property which we create over here in the review component. We created, and its initial value is false, because when you visit the page, you aren't reviewing. So the initial condition is reviewing, that value is initially false, you're not reviewing. So, and we want to show something, different things based on whether you're reviewing or not, as I mentioned. So if you're reviewing, it shows text input. If you're not reviewing, it shows the button over here. This flat list essentially doesn't change. Plus, you show text input and the button, that button that pops up there. So we want to do that inside of this view parent. So we check, is reviewing false? This exclamation mark means, is it false? If it's false, so we'll just return a touchable opacity, just as I showed a couple of minutes ago, which is basically a div, or it is like identical to a div. It's inspired by the HTML div, and it's touchable. So its active opacity is 1. When you press it, it doesn't like lose opacity. We gave it some styles, which creates all this. So maybe a border width of 1, border color of like black, background color of like some darker shade of white against the background you can see. And also using border radius, maybe 5. We gave it some padding, as you can see over here. And we centered its elements, which in this case is only a text element, horizontally. So that all is defined in this styles dot add review container key over here. Add review container, which is basically what I said, with 100%. So basically take 100% of its parent. That Onpress. So when we press it, we want to do something. We pass a function to execute. So essentially, since that logic for showing something based on the value of some variable happens by itself in JSX. So if the variable is true, it shows this over here, and if it's false, it shows this. We shouldn't do anything essentially value. So change it to true, so that this code will get run again. This is returned again, where this time its value is true. So this here becomes false, so it doesn't return this. Instead, it goes to the else using the column, and it returns this over here. Basically all you have to do. And of course, the text inside of the touchable opacity with some styles, and add view, which is this that you see over here. So now over to this part, which is the else. What is shown in place of this when is review is true? Is review is true when I press it? The only thing that happened internally is that is reviewing's value switched to true. It got changed to true, and since it's a state, it's part of the component state, it will refresh. And when it refreshes again, as I told you, it comes over to this if else. the if condition is false, so it goes over to the else, and it returns this over here now, in place of the previous button that you just saw before. So as I told you, if you want to show multiple things in a returned JSX value, in this case, we want to show a text input and we want to show a button or a touchable opacity. We can't just return them like that. We have to return one parent component, and which is essentially a container, and everything you want to return inside of it, you pass them as children to the container. So container is a view, as we've seen multiple times already. It has some styles, which is just to contain our elements. So review input control that. So it's nothing, just to contain. So basically width 100% and margin bottom 20, to give some margin over here between the text input and the button. Make it look, I mean, like up and stuffed. So this component, introduce you to it. It's another React Native core component, which you import from React Native. What it lets you does is you can type in some text, and you'd not just want a user to type in text and that's it, like it's there for him to type in something. You want to do something with that value. So for that reason, text inputs have a prop, which is this over here, value. And this basically says the value of the text. So we're making it dynamic now because we want to save that text somewhere in some variable to use it in some other function. But we could, for instance, but of course we wouldn't do this in a real app. Let's say my review. So if I refresh this now, you see its value is my review. So value, essentially, it determines what's the value of the text input. So if I change this back to my review, you see my review is a variable, another state object, or another state variable, which I created previously over here. My review set my review. Initially, when the person navigates to this page, he doesn't have a review. I mean, logically, its initial value is an empty string. There's no review. So we pass to this text input a value, an initial value of an empty string. And whenever a user types in something like, wait, not here, over here, something like this. So since it didn't save yet, so it's still mapped to the part when it was value equals my review. That value isn't going to change since it's a property of the component. So if I try to type anything, you see it doesn't let me since its value is my review. So that's why we're making it dynamic. So if I save it now, it refreshes. Now it goes back to an empty string and I can start typing again. So text input takes another prop called onChangeText, which is basically a function. You pass to it a function that takes as argument the new value that the user just wrote. So in this case, hi. So at first h. So onChangeText gets called with h, and you can do something with that text. So this is basically a function that gets called with wrote, in this case h, and we're passing it to the setMyReview function, which is this state function, which, as we saw previously, you pass to it a value, my review gets set to that value. So now when we call onChangeText with h, setMyReview, basically, so this happens whenever the user types something, h, so this gets called, and so my review gets set to h, so this gets refreshed again since it's state, and the value of my review now is h, so you see an h over here, over here, I mean. Yes, since this is also, maybe it could, if for some people didn't get the concept, since I commented this part out, I'm not doing anything on change text. So I'm not changing the value of my review anymore on change text. Its value is an empty string. So I change text, I'm not calling any function. So the value of my review is still an empty string. So the text input still shows an empty string. That's why you have to change the value of the variable on every onChange text. And essentially that's what you'd have a text input for, to store what value the user wrote somewhere in the variable and make use of it. For example, in this case, to add that value, that string, to our reviews array. Okay, so that's for unchanged text. Text input has another prop, which is multi-line. We said it's either true or false, in this case, true. So you see, if I type in, it doesn't get truncated. It actually creates a new line for me. A number of lines, it's 4. So that just means like what's the initial like shown lines, number of lines of the text input. If I do 3 instead, you can still write more lines, but initially it's set to the size of 4 lines. So if I did 3 instead, it'll show the size of 3 lines like this, like that. 5 gets bigger, but 4 looks nice. Let's see if that's 4. And finally, which is a nice prop, you notice this enter a review over here, which is there when the value of text input is nothing or an empty string. But when I type something not here. Yeah.
Steven?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Going we
I can't hear you well.
half hour.
Could you repeat what you said? I couldn't hear you well. Could you type it in the chat? Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Well, the workshop initially it was set for 1.5 hours, but since I thought it would be better if I explained the concepts like more in detail so that you'd understand it better, I took a bit of extra time. So there's still things we didn't touch upon, which we can do in a later workshop when we'll add the functionality of getting online values. So I guess this is it for now. We'll come back to this later on, since I don't have enough time to go into it deeply today. It wouldn't be a good idea to just brush upon them. So that's it, I guess. Does anyone have any questions?
I have a question. When you're finished with the code, when you're finished building your app, can you run it on your on your phone, or do you have to upload it to App Store or something? If you're on iPhone, but
No, since of course developers, they don't, when they're in the process of creating apps, they don't create their app and run it on their phone only after it's uploaded and published for everyone to use. So I'm using a simulator in this case, but if I connect my phone via USB, I can run the app on my phone.
oh, okay. All right. Thanks.
Any other question? And I hope the others were, sent clearly. Did anyone have any problem understanding any concept? I guess no. So that's it, I guess, right, Jano?
Yes, it was very nice. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you everyone for joining. And thank you for your time.